Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and soul and mind and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up.
Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We're here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share us, our mission, and our vision of education with your friends. We are super, super grateful. Today, I am delighted to welcome to the podcast, once again, our headmaster, Mr. Alvaro de Vicente. Welcome, Alvaro.
Thank you, Rich.
And we are embarking on this 2024-25 academic year. And before we get to the topic of today's conversation, which is really the voices that our sons are hearing, this is a conversation rooted in the Screwtape Letters, which you read with your seniors every single year. Before we get there, I think it's appropriate to just sort of look forward to the fall semester at some of the opportunities that we have for our parents and then friends of the Heights. So a few opportunities for our dear friends to hang out with you and with our faculty. You're offering a lecture in early October titled Sentimentalism and Loyalty. And then also the Fathers Conference will happen in early November. This is on the life and the teaching of St. Josemaria. And then finally, we will host the Art of Teaching Conference in mid-November. And this is a conference for teaching men. And so a lot of really exciting, good stuff is happening at the Heights lecture that's coming up in October. Tell us about this theme of loyalty, sentimentalism. Just give you, a minute of like what you're hoping to share with us.
Sure. I always find sentimentalism and loyalty interesting because one is very present, the other one is absent in our culture. Right? We live by sentiments. We believe that sentiments rule the day, that decisions ought to be made, if not by according to those sentiments, at least listening to them carefully and making sure that we don't offend them. Right? We have this sense that sentiments have a very low pain tolerance, and therefore we don't want to cause any pain to them and respect them a lot. And sentiments do have they have a place in who we are and how we interact with other people, how we view reality. They have a place, and they have a good place. So part of the lecture is going to be talking about what that place is and what do we mean by taking care of our sentiments, cultivating them, and how cultivating is both letting them grow, but also sometimes like a rebellious child, telling him to go to the corner and just sit there for a while, right? So that's part of it. And then loyalty, Sen, is absent because I think this is experiential for all of us that in our culture, we don't esteem loyalty as much as we used to, or the generations did. Yeah. Whether it is professional, whether it is personal, within the family, even sports teams, it's just not as common. And for my generation, then we can look at it as an interesting cultural experiment or reality. But for the boys, for the younger generation, this is how they're growing up.
Yeah.
And they're looking around and they're imagining this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
So putting those two things together, not claiming that they're cause and effect, but that they have that the worshiping of sentiments may have an effect on disloyalty, lack of loyalty, and what to do about it. So that's what the lecture is going to be be about.
Awesome. That's going to be great. That's October 5th. You can learn more and register at heights.edu. And then, of course, you hop over to the forum side. We've got two great events coming up. The Art of Teaching Conference, which will take place in November. This is November the 13th through the 15th. I think you'll be speaking likely about, education as transfer of a culture, which is just such an important theme. And then in addition, the Fathers Conference, which will take place November 2nd. So this is obviously especially for Heights fathers, but also any dads out there beyond the walls who are friends of the school or just interested in learning more about this place. We'll be speaking the whole day about the life, the teaching of St. Josemaria, who's the founder of Opus Dei and in a way the founder of our school, right?
Right.
And we'll also be joined by Father Javier del Castillo, who is a vicar of Opus Dei in the United States. So really excited to welcome him to campus. But we will just let's get into some Screwtape. So just set the stage a little bit. You read Screwtape every single year. How come?
I do. I read it every year when I teach the seniors here at the Heights. The reason that I teach it, frankly, the reason why I first started teaching it is because when I was a senior at the Heights, the person who was then the headmaster, Dr. Jackson, taught theology to the seniors, and he read Screwtape Letters. So when I became the headmaster and I wanted to teach a class, I decided, well, I'm going to do what he did, which is teach theology, in my case apologetics, to the seniors. And when designing the curriculum, I decided, well, I'm also going to do what he did, right? There's a lot to be said for respecting your elders, especially when you admire your elders, like I admire Dr. Jackson. So I decided, well, I'm going to teach Screwtape Letters because if he thought it was a good idea, it must be it's at least an idea worthwhile considering and trying out. And since then, it's been 23 years now that I've been teaching it every year, and I'm more and more convinced of how incredibly powerful a book it is for any age group, but not really young, but seniors and beyond, right? Any age group, because it's so insightful, right? The premise, I think we know the premise of Screwtape Letters is C.S. Lewis, great Christian philosopher, writing, it's a book of 31 chapters. Each one corresponds to a letter written by an experienced devil to his nephew, who's a rookie, and has been assigned to this young guy to tempt and bring down to hell. And I tell my students, I write on the board with big letters, fiction, like it is fiction, right? It's not real. Only because one of the most depressing moments of my teaching career was some years ago when in February, after reading the book for 5 months with the students, one letter at a time, somebody asked, but sir, where did C.S. Lewis find these letters?
Oh my gosh.
And I think it was a rainy February Monday morning, and I probably just walked out of the classroom and went to my office and cried myself to sleep, right? So it is, they're fictional letters, obviously, but very insightful.
Yeah.
And that's why I read it every year, and it leads to great conversations with the students.
It's awesome. Yeah. It is just a timeless classic. I think it's performed in DC locally as well.
Exactly.
I think they're meant to be read.
Yeah.
So
it's worth going to that performance, by the way.
Really?
I went to some students maybe 10, 12 years ago, and it's phenomenal.
That's great. Yeah, and I was poking around online. I think that there's an online YouTube version featuring John Cleese, which I think would be good to listen to. Anyway, but so obviously there's a lot in Screwtape, and the theme that we're going to focus on today is this question of voices. So, what with regard to the voices that our sons hear, what does Screwtape propose to his nephew about strategy here?
Well, it's really interesting because at one point Screwtape tells his nephew, listen, because you can picture the nephew as this young devil, and he gets excited about how he's getting the young man to think this or think that, or to try to do this one thing or that one or the bad thing. And Screwtape tells him, listen, don't you realize that our best work is not by putting bad thoughts into their minds, but keeping good ones out? So that's our best work, right? So the best work is not by the devil putting a bad thought in my mind, but by the good thoughts that I don't have. So even taking the devil out of the picture and say, the challenge for me to be a good man, for a boy to be a good boy, may not be the bad things that I do, but the good things that I don't even think about doing, right? Or, the good thoughts that I don't have. It's not the times that I think critically of somebody, but the many times that I don't think charitably about so many people, right? It may be that that's actually his best work. So when thinking about this topic, the voices that our sons hear, I thought, wow, Screwtape would in some ways be happy about this, because he could say, go ahead and look for those voices. The real question is, what are the voices our sons are not hearing?
Interesting.
Right? What are the thoughts they are not having? Right? What are the conversations they're not having? That's the real interesting part of this topic, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is that it seems perfectly fitting with our tradition's human anthropology, right? Which is this idea that okay, we as human beings, I mean, really, in a way, there's a way in which, just a way, evil doesn't, strictly speaking, exist. It's more of like a privation of a good. It's a lack of a good. So there is something that kind of fits with that. There are so many other voices to hear. I mean, you just hear what what kids think is important politically, or what they think is important from a philosophical perspective, and you can sort of tell by what they're saying where they're going, what the inputs are.
Right.
And so what a beautiful thing to step back and not just reflect on sort of keeping bad things out, right? Which is, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do that anymore.
Right.
But to focus rather on what are the voices that we want to make sure our sons are hearing, and then facilitating that listening. So in light of that, what are the voices that we want our sons to hear? Where do we want them to listen deeply?
So here's one way that I could think about it. I'm going to think, okay, what are the voices that we want them to hear? Let's think about three spheres of voices, right? One would be other voices, people around our sons, parents, educators, good friends, relatives, right? The second sphere is not just people around you, but what I would say divine voices. If we believe that there are evil voices, there are good voices, right? Divine voices. A clear example of that would be a vocation, right? A vocational call. But even without that, just go to the divine voice to do something nice for this older lady walking down the street, right? Do something nice for my little sister, I kind of divine voice. And then the third sphere will be the voices within our conscience, right? What I ought to do. So if those are the three spheres, just imagine, talk about the first sphere, right? The other voices. Just imagine as a parent, right? Any parent listening to this. Just imagine how great your son would be if he actually listened to and did everything you ever told him in his life, right? If he actually, everything that you said, all those wise counsels, if he actually said, if he was like a computer, right, that could just take it in and put it into action, we would have a lot of really good, nearly perfect people walking around. So, the problem is not that we're not telling the right things to our sons, right? The challenge is that they're not hearing, they're not listening to the right things. So that's one consideration. Like, how can we increase the times that our sons actually listen to people they should listen to, right? Parents and mentors and so forth, teachers. Equal with the divine. Like, how do we know? I mean, we see people who respond to some type of divine call, right? I mean, we see priests, ministers, married people, married, vocationally. Well, what about the vocations we don't see, right? What about the divine calls that we don't see because they were not listened to, right? And of course, the conscience. I mean, that's the most experiential for all of us. The times that anytime that we have regret. Well, it's because I didn't listen to my conscience. I knew I should have, but I didn't. So if those are the spheres, I think the question is, okay, clearly they're not listening to all those voices. We could end with that, negative statement, right? Just call it a day. So, thanks for listening, folks.
Talk to you next week.
It's been great. Or are there some things that we could do actually to try to increase the number of times that they listen to these voices?
Yeah, no, that's I'm really excited to get there and happy to end on that note or continue on that note. It's interesting when you talk about as parents, I mean, the natural, maybe the too easy place to go from here is to say, well, I just need to speak more, or I've got to say
right.
what I say more loudly to make sure that they hear me. But In fact, it seems like that could even be counterproductive. And I think you've given us so much good guidance on how to actually, it's not a question of saying more, in a way. It's not necessarily about you. It's about how to foster a certain receptivity in the boy to what you're hoping to offer him, to what you're hoping to share. A quick intermediary question, I guess, and maybe this is a road that leads to nowhere, but the whole idea of voices is an interesting one. It's an interesting image. I wonder why we hear voice. Obviously, it's a metaphor for somebody telling me something, but I wonder. It's interesting that choice of words here when it comes to scripture, when it comes to our conscience. I mean, maybe voice is like the universe sharing something with us. Or can you unpack it a little bit? I don't know if there's anything to discuss here, but I think it's a beautiful image. It sort of indicates a personality behind everything that we're surrounded by, and this fact that maybe everything is in some way trying to share things with us. And as parents, we're just one part of that.
Yes.
Somebody.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would say that my qualifications to really unpack the term voices and its significance is deficient, perhaps most deficient. But when I'm thinking about voices in this context, right, in the context of a moral communication, right, because we're not talking just about voices in terms of, I don't know, go right or left, when you're giving directions. We're talking about voices, meaning that there is a communication from somebody to me as to a right course to take, right, morally speaking, spiritually speaking. And of course, the examples that come to mind or the images, the first one is the second person of the Holy Trinity, the Word, and if there is a word, there is a voice, right? Somebody either emitted or wrote that word, right? There is a voice already. There's a communication. So there's clearly a divine communication that takes place, right? We could even say that obviously God is, but God is also a communicator.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. As far as he's a creator. And also the other interesting one of God bringing the animals to Adam and Eve so they could name them.
Yeah.
Right? Because once you name something, it belongs to you. There's a sense of possessiveness, right? That's why I think often we give nicknames. It's like, you got a name, but I'm going to give you a nickname because I want to make you mine, in a loving, affectionate way,
endearing,
right?
Totally.
Endearing, right? So in terms of voices, I think about that from the very beginning, there's this kind of moral communication, right? And when we talk about voices here, that's what we're talking about is what is the moral communication from others, parents, teachers to students within the conscience and also divine.
I love it because it roots a conversation in this place where, you have these persons, which sort of in a way by definition entails a certain relationship. And so how can you help them be open in their relationships to everybody that's trying to help them be fully themselves, including, the first, second, and third persons of the Holy Trinity.
Right.
All right. So how do we help our boys hear those voices? You offer some great pointers, great suggestions.
So I'm going to offer a couple suggestions.
Great.
I'll keep it to 5. How about that?
Perfect.
Okay. First one, the most basic one I would say is to slow down the noise. Right, we live in a very noisy society, right? I mean, G.K. Chesterton talked about that in his book Orthodoxy, right? In the chapter, I believe it's The Romance of Orthodoxy, where he talks about how we complain of how active the society is and it's so noisy. And he says, actually, the problem is not that we're very active, it's that we're very passive. That's why it's so noisy. If instead of driving cars, sitting in a car, we would be walking, we would be more active, but it would be a lot quieter. And I think, if he were to be writing today, the example he would use probably would not be cars. It probably would be emails, right? He would probably say, the reason that we have so many emails is because sometimes we're very lazy. And instead of really thinking about something and summarizing the thought and calling somebody, we just write an email that is half cooked. But we live in a very noisy society. Our sons live in a very noisy society, with music, with the screens. They get in a car, music goes on right away. They get home, the TV's on. The shows. It just noisy. They're looking at YouTube videos. It's just like always, right? Some noise. So I think that, the first one is, can we promote times of silence in their lives in an easy way? Like, for instance, what about getting the habit that every time I get in the car, I'm not going to turn anything on for the first 10 minutes, right? Not even if it's a really good podcast, unless it's a Heights class. I think. So I don't want to undermine the whole process.
Turn it up.
In which case, turn it up. No, but the first 10 minutes, just in silence.
Even Heights cast,
right?
Yeah,
even totally. Heights cast. Okay, I'll be magnanimous. Even Heights cast. Wait 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, one of the great things about traffic in D.C. is that anywhere you go is going to be more than 10 minutes. So you're going to have plenty of time for the podcast, right?
Yeah.
But those first 10 minutes in silence. What about times in the evening where we say, hey, if you're going to go to bed at 10, 9 o'clock, you shut everything down, right? No more screens, no music, like shut everything down. Begin a time of growing silence, so that by the time you get to bed, you can fall asleep right away, right? And sleep better. And here I would say, we got to watch our own example.
Oh, man, yeah.
Like, what do we do, right? I mean, what is my behavior? And I would say not just my behavior in front of the kids, but my behavior. Because whatever my behavior is, that's what they're gonna see.
Yeah.
Right. So, do I impose this upon myself? Am I willing to not, to be in silence for 10 minutes in the car every day? Am I willing to power down by not looking at my phone, not looking at the screens for an hour or 45 minutes before I go to bed, right? So that would be, that's the first kind of suggestion, is to slow down the noise. Right?
Can I ask a question on that one?
Yes.
Is it possible to ask a 17, 18-year-old high school student to power down his phone at 9:30 when it seems like that's the time where a lot of the noise starts to actually build? Are you depriving that child of friendship and?
No, you're actually providing the sleep for that child.
Yeah.
Right? No, I absolutely, it is possible. The fact that there's a communal bad habit doesn't mean that I should let my beloved child, participate in the bad habit,
but
right?
Al, everybody's doing that.
Yeah. like we're all doing this together, right? We're all drinking the poison together. Come on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it is possible.
Okay.
And kids are very adaptable. They'll figure out a way to communicate more before that.
Yeah.
Right? Even if he becomes known as, well, he's the guy who after 9:30 doesn't, he's out of the loop.
Yeah.
That's fine. Like that, for a teenage boy, that can seem like a big deal, but you and I know that is not a big deal, and they can recover from it very easily.
Yeah.
Right?
That's awesome. And especially if, right, we're doing the same thing. If we're like, hey, you got to power down at 9:30.
Right.
Meanwhile, I'm over here working on my fantasy team.
Exactly.
That's a problem.
Yeah. No, our example has to be huge, because it's really hard to tell them this is the way you have to behave, right? Because otherwise, what happens if I tell a 17-year-old kid, listen, you can't look at screens for an hour before you go to bed, and he knows that I'm looking at my phone all the way until I go to bed. In his mind, not only am I hypocritical, but in his mind is thinking, well, he's treating me as a kid, not as the guy that I am, right? And therefore, I'm justified in rebelling and looking at screens.
Got it.
Right. So I think our example is very powerful in this regard.
It's awesome.
So that's the first suggestion. The second one is related to this, is not only to slow down noise, but to promote what I would call contemplative times, right? To promote times when we facilitate a quieter, more relaxed, more thoughtful, more contemplative time. For instance, going for a walk. So if you have a dog, you have to walk your dog. Right? It's good for the dog. It's good for the house, I guess. Right?
Oh yeah.
You gotta walk the dog, but insofar as you have a dog, you know that's just a deal. You gotta walk your dog, and I say walk your kid. I mean, not on a leash and stuff like that. But what about saying, I'm going to try to go on a walk with one of my children every evening. Maybe we can't do it every evening, right? Schedules get complicated. But if I try to do it every evening, I might do it 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Right? If I say once a week, I'm going to do it maybe once a month. That's just usually the way it works, right? And I could even have a little schedule, so-and-so Monday, so-and-so Tuesday. It doesn't have to be a long, it could be 20 minutes. Just go around the neighborhood and just walk. And both as a way to have that one-on-one time with that son that will be priceless.
Yeah.
Right? That would say 99% of the time it's going to seem that the conversation is really not that significant or important. But you've created the time for that one time that conversation is really going to matter. Aside from that, just the fact that you are helping your son develop the habit of natural contemplation, walking around. If you live in a neighborhood that is beautiful and actually is enjoyable to look at, even better. But, I live in the city. I've lived in cities almost my whole life. I enjoy walking around, even seeing shop windows. Just the fact that you're outside, and there's something really healthy about that. Mm-hmm. And walking, and it kind of slows down your mind. It allows you to think about things in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. Yeah. So that would be the second suggestion, right? Promote contemplative times. It doesn't have to be a walk, but I just think that that's an easy one and one that works well.
Love it.
Third one, and this is one like, all right, folks, we're all waiting for this one, and of course it's coming. Reading, right? You just can't beat it, right? Reading daily, if possible. But I would say not for school, right? There is reading for school. There is reading outside of school. Like reading for school, you're reading because you're going to be tested, and this book has been given to you, is required, and hopefully it's a really good book. Right? I know that we have very good literature here at the heights that we teach, right? So they're really good books to read with a lot of content, a beautiful expression of that content. But it's still, you can't pull away from the fact that I'm going to be tested on this. So talk about reading just for enjoyment, even if the literature is not as worthwhile as the one you're doing in the school, but the fact that you're doing it because you want to has a lot of merit. And if it's 20 minutes, great. If it's 5 minutes, fine. Like whatever you can do. But a couple of things to that. One is, I don't think you can tell your son that you have to read for fun if you yourself don't read for fun. Yeah. Because the boy's going to ask, like, well, you don't read. Why should I? Well, because it's good for you, but you don't do it. Shut up and do it, right? I mean, there's no argument. So we have to get to the point where actually we're not telling the boy to read because it's good for him. Just that. We're actually sharing something that we know to be really good for man. Yeah. And I want you to read because you are a man and you're going to be a good man. And maybe even reading together, creating a time when, after dinner, we're going to sit down quietly for 20 minutes. Maybe it's part of the power down, right? At this time, 9:30, you shut down screens, and then, I'm going to be in the living room reading. It'd be great if you come and join me for a few minutes before you get ready for bed, right? And we don't have to talk. You just sit in there and reading my book, you're reading your book. I also think that having actual books, right? Actual books that you can see on bookshelves, right? And because actual bookshelves with actual books are a physical reminder to the boy that this is a good thing to do, right? And it creates that sense of coolness to it. Like I can pull one of these books out and open it and read it and put it back in the shelf. Even building shelves in the rooms, right, if we can, so they can begin their own library. Right, and I know there's several students who have their own libraries, and they're very proud of it, right? And they say, "Well, sir, that's in my library already. I have this." But like, good for you, right? Awesome. Good for you, right? And hopefully they'll marry wives in the future that will enjoy having those libraries, and don't tell them to get rid of them, but hold on to those to those books.
It's a merging of the libraries.
Yes, there we go. Right. So anyhow, that's the third suggestion, right? To read. The fourth one would be the art of conversation, and I'm thinking about dinner, right? Assuming that is a kind of family dinner, and of course it depends on number of siblings, how young they are. But I've heard you talk about this, Rich, and I've seen it in your own home. This idea of one voice, right? And dinner, where you sit down and there is one conversation. We used to do it also growing up. We always had one voice. It was just three brothers and my parents and grandma was deaf as anything. So, her interjections were always random because they had nothing to do with the conversation. But, God bless her. She was a wonderful lady and she was part of the family. But there was always one voice. And I remember growing up, we had this idea where we just going to took turns, talk about how the morning was or the afternoon, whatever, what we did. And then sometimes we'd go around the whole table, everyone get a chance. Sometimes we wouldn't. And I knew that if my oldest brother was first, I was in trouble because he loves to tell stories and he could make a story out of anything. So whenever it was his turn, I knew like, oh boy, like it's not going to get to me because he's going to go, right? But the idea of talking to a group, the idea of listening, right? I think that's really important, right? The habit of listening to others. Because going back to one of the original points, right, that a Screwtape is trying to get us to not listen to the voices, right, to keep things out. Well, how about if we practice listening? And one of the ways to practice listening is through this dinner conversation, right? Listen to your brother, right? Listen to your sister. Our exemplifying it, we listen attentively, right? We ask follow-up questions like, well, how did that happen? Or can you repeat that? Or what? That's really interesting, like whatever it might be, right? So that our sons grow up with a sense that you converse with people. And conversing is not just matching your story and giving you a better one, right? That can happen. But conversation is actually listening and paying attention and trying to understand what the other person is saying and sort of admiring, appreciating, right, the story they're telling. So that's the fourth one. And then the fifth and final one is related to this idea that we talk about at the heights of a conspiracy for the good, how we love to conspire with the parents to for the benefit of their sons. And one aspect of that is parents and teachers helping each other out by pointing to the boy how good the other person's advice is. Right? So anytime, I know as a mentor, anytime that I can tell one of my mentees, one of my students, wow, your dad is really wise. That's a very wise thing that he told you. Your mom is so right. Right? Maybe you don't want to say, yes, mom, but take that to heart. Really good advice. Right? She knows a lot and she loves you. And parents doing the same thing. Well, yeah, Mr. So-and-so, go ask him. Go. I remember one time one boy came, he was in high school and says, sir, my mom has told me that I have to ask you whether I should get a smartphone. And I don't want to do it because I know what you're going to say, but she told me that I can't get one unless I ask you, and you say that it's okay. So what are my chances?
That's awesome.
He was a pragmatist.
What are the odds?
And I said, well, I'd love to talk to you about it, but let me just tell you, they're not good.
Yeah, not good. Not good.
They're not good right now. But, that kind of interaction, like go talk to so-and-so, right? Go talk to your dad. Go talk to your mom. Go talk to your teacher, not only to change your grade, but, ask your mentor about that. See what he thinks about that choice you have to make, right? That idea that you're thinking about. So it's kind of this mutual reinforcement of the credibility that parents and mentors have in the eyes of the boys.
That's awesome. You said the art of conversation, which I think that is such a perfect word for almost all of these points you've given us, because at the end of the day, the art it's the virtue of making, of crafting, which is what we as parents are invited to do in our homes.
Right.
Is to craft an environment where our children can hear. And so that's where the fun part is. You've given us lots of ideas, but now it's up to us as parents to kind of sit down and craft something really, really cool. And one of the things I love about working here is that there's exposure to so many families, each of whom have their own culture and practices, and just so many are coming to mind right now. You mentioned conversation over dinner. I know one family, I think it's after dinner, they actually do, everybody goes around and shares their rose and their thorn. Their kids are younger, but
Right.
What was really great, what was tough, or highs and lows,
Right.
that works kind of across the ages. I've talked to families who have kind of a shared 45 minutes of quiet study when the kids first get home. I've talked to families who do that, kind of that late night read. But I think, gosh, there's just this full menu of possible things that you can do.
Yes.
Infinity choices.
Yes.
To help our sons hear in infinity ways.
Yes.
The voice, the ultimate voice. It's beautiful.
And I would say that, as you listen to this podcast, I'm always sensitive to not overwhelming people, right? Because you can listen to this and go, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad parent. I
30
do so many
things to do now.
Yeah, and then your kid's going to get home tonight and it's going to get hit by a cannon shell. Like, oh my gosh, like why is life changing so rapidly, right? So, some of these things are going to work better for some than others. Yeah. They may have to be adapted, but I would say is think about them and pick one.
Yeah.
Right. Pick one that you're not doing already that you think, I think that could work. Right, I can see, because if you don't think it's going to work, it's not worth trying.
Right,
it's going to seem so awkward and artificial. Something that you can, picture yourself and think, I can do this. This is going to work. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Right, it's going to be great thing for us to do. Just pick one and begin doing that. And if that's successful, then you can develop another one. You can add another one. If it isn't, you can shift and try something else. Right, but that is the one by one progression that I think will be most practical.
I love that. And is it fair to say that the less natural these practices are to ourselves in our own life, the more the slower we should try to roll those out for our families?
100%.
So like if we never read, then maybe take a minute and say, I'm going to read every day for a week for 10 minutes after dinner myself.
100%.
And then
okay. Right, or if I'm never in silence in the car, let me do that for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then let me go and tell my son, here's what I'm doing now. You got to do it.
That's all. Yeah.
Right? That's much more natural.
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, this is what you're going to do. Like,
yeah.
Right? That the question would be like, why?
Right.
Like, I've never seen you do this, right?
Yeah.
Even better if you give your son a ride and you say, hey, this is what I'm trying now.
Yeah.
So we're not going to put any music. We're still going to talk because it's going to be really awkward to just sit there, next to your boy, although maybe he'll enjoy it. I don't know. But, to your point, there's a natural way to roll these things out.
Right.
And that always includes my doing it myself and doing it to the point where I feel natural doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just have to make sure that we don't rush out and make a ton of young guys thoroughly agnostic, but ultimately I think all these pointers are great. It's not just great for our kids; they're great for us, and that's the beauty of teaching. Is that fundamentally, it's an invitation to be a witness, but you can't witness if you're not doing it yourself. And so, another opportunity to recognize our limitations, try to overcome them, and then share that effort with these beautiful young people in our life.
Exactly.
So, Alvaro, this has been fantastic as always. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
So, friends, I invite you now to turn off the podcast and enjoy a few minutes of silence. Thanks so much for listening. Again, more information on our website, heights.edu, about the upcoming lecture with our headmaster on loyalty and sentimentalism. Also, the Art of Teaching Conference and the Fathers Conference coming up in November. So, the Art of Teaching Conference for teaching men, the Fathers Conference for dads at the Heights and men beyond the walls who are interested in just spending time with our community. We'd love to have you. But thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Lift high.